Well, greetings, church family. Today's daily Bible reading had us in Ezekiel chapters 26 and 27. What we see in chapter 26, all 21 verses, is the judgment on Tyre. Now, God is continuing to proclaim his judgment on pagan nations. He's turning his attention to Tyre. He goes into quite some length as he does so. In fact, chapters 26 through 28 are saturated with God's prophecies concerning that ancient city of the Phoenicians. Tyre was important commercially in those days, had close ties with Israel during the reigns of David and Solomon, and it was known as the commercial center of the ancient Mediterranean world. It was actually made up of two parts. The word Tyre means rock, and it was made up of the most of the city on the mainland, and then the rest of it on a rocky island that was just a half-mile from the shore. Now, Tyre is located north of Israel in the southernmost part of Lebanon, and it is nothing like it was back in those days. And we see why with these prophecies of judgment on the city. And Tyre used to be buddies with Israel. He even tried to ally with King Zedekiah against Nebuchadnezzar in Jeremiah 27, 1 through 6. But they later mocked and scorned God's people, and they would eventually sell Jews as slaves to both the Greeks and Edomites. We see this in Joel 3, 4 through 8, and Amos 1, 9 and 10. God's judgment on Tyre is specifically because they rejoiced over Israel's downfall. Feinberg suggests that such rejoicing was because this commercial city would benefit financially from that downfall, with free passage for Tyre's caravans and thus greater prosperity in trade. And so God's judgment on Tyre was stated to be the battering of the city by many nations, just as the sea's waves beat upon Tyre's shoreline, we see in verse 3. The first nation that would come upon that city would be Babylon, verses 7 through 14, but that would not be the last. Tyre would be attacked by various nations throughout human history until her eventual conquering by the Saracens in the 1300s. In verses 15 through 21, we see that Yahweh promises Tyre's downfall would affect all of their people. There would be total desolation and terrors until the city became like one uninhabited by civilization. Verse 19. And that's a judgment which did come true over the next couple of millennia. In chapter 27, verses 1 through 25, we see the glory of Tyre. After promising in chapter 26, 17, and 18 that a lament would be taken up by people over Tyre's downfall, so great would its downfall be that such a lament would be necessary, well, the Lord explains just how rich and productive and important Tyre found itself to be at the time of this judgment. And notice the city of Tyre, its arrogance, the arrogance of the people, right? In verse 3 of chapter 27, thus says Master Yahweh, O Tyre, you have said, I am perfect in beauty, and so on and so forth. They were full of the best lumber throughout the region, even with ivory-laid walls, verses 5 and 6. They relied on the choicest of rich linens from the Mediterranean world for their ships and buildings, verse 7. They were unparalleled in maritime travel and commerce, verses 8 and 9. Full of valiant warriors from all over the ancient world, verses 10 and 11. They're selling and trading goods to customers from throughout the region with rich goods including valuable metals, ivory tusks, ebony, precious gems, rich linen, delicious food and drink, spices and sweets, and the best of livestock. We see in verses 12 through 25 and 24, and we see that ships from Tarshish, now that's likely ancient Spain, were used for transportation. That shows just how Tyre was the crown jewel of sea trading in the Mediterranean. We see that in verse 25. But then we get to the lament over Tyre in verses 26 through 36. Earthly riches and praise and power are no match for the Lord's judgment. And God's wrath upon Tyre will be so complete that its rowers, wealth, wares, merchandise, sailors, pilots, dock workers, merchants, and men of war would all be destroyed as though cast into the heart of the seas. The lamentation over Tyre was promised to be so great that it would be as though the lands themselves would shake from its loud cry, and the brokenness of Tyre was promised to be so tremendous that future generations would point back to it as an example of desolation and absence of life. Tyre would become terrified and cease forever as that commercial capital it once was. Well, there's a fair warning, isn't there, in these two chapters? And the lesson of Tyre's destruction Do not try to satisfy yourself in the riches of this world. Everything in this world will one day be toast. 1 Timothy 6:17 through 19, instruct those who are rich in this present world not to be conceited or to fix their hope on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly supplies us with all things to enjoy. Instruct them to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, storing up for themselves the treasure of a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is life indeed. No matter what financial status that you find yourself in, we see clearly from these two chapters and from the verses we just read in the New Testament, we are to trust in the Lord and devote ourselves to serving Him, loving Him, relying on Him, and not whatever accumulation of things or power, possessions, pleasures, whatever they might be, that this world has to offer. Look to the Lord instead. This has been Ezekiel chapters 26 and 27, and I hope you have a great day.